What's up, guys? So today we're going to chat about the 1-6 razor versus the 1-10. Pretty common question, which do I go with and why? It usually comes down to money, but we're going to put that aside and we're going to talk about the actual differences between the two and what's going to fit your use case better, one or the other. A little quick background on my use case with both of these. I've only had this one about 3 months, but already a ton of training time on it. 5 matches or so, something like that, including a major, the GOAT match. Highly recommended next year. This one I've had about pushing 2 years now. So obviously a ton of time, ton of rounds down it between training, matches, various match types on this one, including several scope carbine matches, PCSL, all that stuff. So I feel as if I'm well versed enough to speak on the benefits, the differences, the negatives between each of these, just with the amount of time that I've got on both of them and the round count. So tons of abuse, tons of use, and tons of insight. So the most obvious difference between the two is obviously this one's 10 power, this one's up to 6 power. So you've got that 4 extra power in this one. The 1-10 is also a first focal plane versus the 1-6 is a second focal plane. You can go look into all the technical specs on that or watch a different video. I'm not going to dive into the weeds on that. Basically what it means is on the first focal plane, as you zoom in on the reticle, the zoom expands the reticle, right? First follows the reticle is kind of the saying behind it. So what you see on 1 power is going to be different than what you see on 10 power because as you zoom in, the reticle is going to expand. This is a second focal plane, which means as you zoom in, the reticle stays exactly as it is. So aside from that, the reticles are very different. As you can see here with the fully zoomed in 1-10 reticle and here with the 1-6 reticle, and this is going to stay the same regardless of if you're on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. The 1-10, you can see what it looks like on 1 power, and you're going to have variation between those two as you zoom in and out, right? You're gonna just have slightly bigger or slightly smaller image of that reticle. So with these two reticle options, you've obviously got a lot of different stuff going on. With the 1-6, you've got the general crosshair reticle most people are fairly familiar with. You've got your windage hash marks and you've got your elevation hash marks. This is a mil reticle, so that's the measurement unit we're using here. This one also a mil reticle, but you have the full Christmas tree, right? And this intimidates a lot of people. It's actually fairly simple once you get into it. That's a different video, or go check out someone else's channel for more info on that. But this is what you get with the 1-10, right? So if you know how to use this, it's got a lot more capability than the 1-6 does with the reticle that you've got here. That aside, on 1X, so common LPVO shooting, what you're going to really see a difference on is obviously the reticle image, but the center illuminated dot. Because you saw previously what the center dot looks like all the way zoomed in on the 1-10. So when you pull that back out, it's still that, just smaller and illuminated on 1 power versus this standard dot across the board. So the biggest thing that I've found between the two and the biggest difference on 1 power is the center dot on this is far crisper than the center dot on this, on the 1-10, which means when you're shooting from say 30 to 60 yards unsupported, so not on a barricade, just offhand shooting, it's harder by a very small margin to shoot good points with the 1-10, just because that center reticle is a little bit beefier and this one's a little bit crisper. So not talking full-size silhouette targets or anything like that. That's gonna be about the same. It's when you're trying to take more precise shots. So say shooting head boxes, shooting very tight partial, shooting scaled targets, that sort of stuff is where the 1-6 really shines on the 1 power in the mid-distance game. Up close, not a huge difference, right? If you're shooting full-size opens within 30 yards, you're not going to notice a difference between the two center dots. It's when you start to get beyond that on 1 power that you notice a difference. Once you start zooming in, this becomes kind of a negligible difference. Another thing that gets brought up fairly frequently as the difference between these two is the Eyebox back of the 1-10 versus the Eyebox back of the 1-6. Now, a lot of people say that the Eyebox back of the 1-6 is far more forgiving than the Eyebox back of the 1-10. It is, but not as much as some people would make it out to be. There are small differences, but it's not huge. It's not, you're not going to be fishing for the 1 to 10 if you can find the Eyebox on the 1 to 6. It might take you a little bit more time in dry fire to really nail it, but with enough time behind it, you're going to be running it just fine. And then you're going to have a more refined mount, which if you have questions on that, you can go to a previous video of mine on are LPVO slow? No, that's the answer to that. So with that Eyebox difference, right? Most people with enough dry fire aren't really going to notice it. You may initially, when you first pick up an LPVO and you're adjusting to the tighter Eyebox versus something like a red dot. That's just a training issue. So putting that aside and just going 1 power to 1 power, which is the better option? They're about the same. So glass clarity is, I would say, fairly comparable. This one may be a little bit clearer on 1 power, at least between these two examples, because that's another thing to consider is quality control is going to cause some small, very, very small, because Vortex is good at this, variations in what glass quality looks like on a 1 to 10 versus a 1 to 6. So keep that in mind when you're trying to actually compare the optics for yourself in person. That said though, if you're shooting on 1 power, you're likely shooting at such a speed that you're not going to really notice the slight definition changes between the glass on the 1 to 10 and the glass on the 1 to 6. If you're shooting at a pace that's good. If you're sitting there just trying to shoot tiny little groups at 5 yards from behind a bench, you might pick up on it, but you really shouldn't be training like that anyways. So another small difference between these two optics is your adjustment dials. So when you're zeroing or dialing for windage, what you can actually do with the dials on here. So with the 1 to 10, you've got 0.1 MRAD adjustments. If it'll focus. So with that, you can be much more refined with your 0 first and foremost versus what you can do on the 1 to 6. And then beyond that, you can be much more refined with dialing for windage or elevation if you're going to do farther shooting, right? And that's another deep dive. We won't get too much into that now, but that is a consideration. So this is where we start to enter into use case stuff, is if you're really trying to do a lot more at distance. And for me, the defining distance between these two is about 400 yards. If you're really wanting to do a ton of work beyond 400, the 1 to 10 is what you want. Not just because of the windage and elevation adjustments being a little more precise, but the reticle. So you can make decent hits out to 500. Past 500, it's got to get a little bit iffy, and your first round impact probability is going to be a little bit lower with the 1 to 6. Not only because of what you've got to dial or your refined 0, but just what you can actually accomplish with the reticle on the 1 to 10 versus the 1 to 6. And this isn't to say it's impossible to get hits at 400 plus yards with the 1 to 6. You absolutely can. But the 1 to 10 is going to just give you a much better probability of getting first round impact or secondary follow-up shots if you're having to correct for windage, elevation, all of that sort of stuff. And again, that topic of how to use the reticle effectively for that sort of engagement, separate video, separate topic entirely. But it is a consideration if you're looking at these two. So if you're really trying to shoot sub 400, and for me, I kind of define that as PCSL style stuff, where most of the shooting is going to be done 1 to 2 power, maybe 3 power, pushing to 6 every now and again. The 1 to 6 is perfectly adequate. If you're going to be doing a lot of potentially 3-gun style stuff, where you may see yourself stretching out to 600 these days, or other kind of outlaw rifle matches, or scoped carbine, right? Gas gun, quantified performance type stuff, where you're shooting out to 900, 950, maybe even 1,000 yards, the 1 to 10 is the one you want. So if we're talking kind of your idea is to put together a do-all rifle, right? You just want one gun that's gonna let you shoot from 0 to whatever max distance you desire. For most people, that's going to be beyond 400, right? The 1 to 10 is probably the optic for you. If you don't want to have multiple optic setups based on use case, just grab a 1 to 10, get to work with it, figure out the tighter Eyebox, and just call it a day. Because you're going to be far better off with this reticle and the slight diminishing performance up close. Again, not a huge deal, right? You can still get good hits. You could still shoot at a perfectly adequate speed. It's just not quite as good as this. But if you're not going to get one gun set up with this, one gun set up with this, just get a 1 to 10 if you're really trying to stretch to 600 to 800 yards. If you're just trying to do PCSL style stuff and you just want an LPVO to give you that little added edge because, you know, magnifiers suck, ACOGs kind of suck, this is what you want. Just grab a Vortex 1 to 6, call it a day, and get shooting. I think that about covers it. If there's any questions, comments, criticisms, any of that stuff, drop them in the comments. I may do another video on LPVOs or just general competition optic setups at some point, depending on how those comments go. Like if I missed anything, let me know. That's about it. All right, see you guys.